Ma'am, with all due respect, those look like something you bought at a surplus store. The voice, belonging to a staff sergeant whose chest was puffed out with the temporary authority of youth, cut through the low murmur of the annual warrior's breakfast. The crowd of younger soldiers around him laughed, a nervous, sycophantic sound that echoed off the polished floors of the dining hall. The target of his jibe, an older woman with silver hair pulled back in a severe, disciplined bun, did not flinch. She gave no sign she had even heard him. Her gaze remained fixed on the middle distance, her posture an unwavering column of stillness amidst the shifting currents of disrespect. She sat alone at a small table, a simple black dress her uniform, a shadow box of medals her only credential. But when the three-star general, who had just entered the hall unnoticed, saw the way her hands rested on the table, knuckles slightly bent, thumbs parallel, a posture of perfect, patient readiness, he stopped dead in his tracks. A memory, old and sharp, pierced the fog of 30 years. If you believe that true respect is earned in silence and proven by action, type competence below. The woman, whose name no one in that room yet knew, slowly lifted a porcelain coffee cup to her lips. Her movements were a study in economy, a ballet of practiced efficiency that was utterly lost on the arrogant staff sergeant and his court of jesters. He wasn't finished. Emboldened by her silence, which he mistook for weakness, he sauntered closer. He pointed a thumb over his shoulder at his own modest ribbon rack. "See, we earn these, ma'am. We don't just collect them." He gestured vaguely at her shadow box, where a distinguished service cross sat nestled beside a constellation of other awards that seemed, to his inexperienced eyes, utterly incongruous for a woman of her apparent generation. The assumptions were thick in the air, a toxic smog of ignorance. He assumed her age meant she was from an era when women filed papers, not field reports. He assumed her quiet demeanor was the frailty of an outsider. He assumed her presence was a form of stolen valor, a pathetic attempt to borrow the prestige he felt was exclusively his. The onlookers, a mix of active-duty personnel and older veterans, shifted uncomfortably. They were witnesses to a quiet mugging of dignity, yet they remained silent, complicit in their inaction. But the woman's calm was not weakness. It was a fortress. It was the profound, unshakable peace of someone who had faced far worse than the hollow words of a boy playing soldier and had not only survived, but prevailed. The event's master of ceremonies, a flustered young captain, was beginning to panic. The guest speaker, a decorated colonel, was stuck in traffic, and 100 pairs of eyes were growing restless. The schedule was crumbling. Seizing another opportunity to display his supposed wit, Staff Sergeant Miller called out from his table, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Hey, Captain, maybe the war hero over here can tell us a few stories to pass the time." A few of his cronies snickered, but the joke landed with a thud in the tense atmosphere. It was a cruel, public challenge, designed to humiliate. The captain, desperate, looked over at the silent woman. He saw not a decorated veteran, but a potential solution, a temporary filler. He approached her table cautiously. "Ma'am," he began, "I apologize for the imposition, but would you be willing to say a few words? Anything at all would be helpful." He expected a refusal, a flustered excuse. Instead, the woman's gaze shifted, meeting his for the first time. Her eyes were the color of a winter sky, clear and deep. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Understood," she said. Her voice was quiet, yet it carried a strange resonance, a gravelly texture of authority that was completely at odds with her appearance. She rose from her chair not with the stiffness of age, but with the fluid grace of someone whose body was a well-maintained instrument. She walked to the podium, her steps measured and even, a cadence of purpose that silenced the remaining whispers. The room watched, a collective breath held in suspense. They expected a rambling anecdote, perhaps a sentimental memory. They were not prepared for the demonstration of skill that was to come. She did not adjust the microphone. She did not shuffle any notes. She simply stood there, her hands resting lightly on the sides of the lectern, and surveyed the room with that same unnerving calm. The silence deepened, becoming heavy, expectant. Staff Sergeant Miller leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips, ready for the inevitable failure. Then, she began to speak. She did not tell a story of battle. She did not recount a heroic deed. Instead, she began to recite the creed of the non-commissioned officer. "No one is more professional than I," she began, and the first 5 words landed with the force of a physical blow. Her voice was not loud, but it possessed a unique power, a perfect clarity that filled every corner of the hall. It was a voice stripped of all emotion except one, absolute conviction. "I am a non-commissioned officer, a leader of soldiers." With every line, the atmosphere in the room transformed. This was not a recitation, it was a testament. It was the living embodiment of the words. The younger soldiers, who had mumbled the creed 1,000 times in training, sat bolt upright, hearing it as if for the first time. The older veterans felt a forgotten fire stir in their chests. The words she spoke were their words, the bedrock of their identity, but she was delivering them from a place of experience so profound it felt sacred. Staff Sergeant Miller's smirk had vanished, replaced by a pale mask of shock. He knew that creed. He could say it in his sleep, but he had never understood it. Not like this. He was hearing the creed as it was written, in grit, in sacrifice, in the quiet professionalism that he had just so loudly mocked. The air crackled. The room was no longer a dining hall. It was a sanctuary, and she was its keeper. As she delivered the final, powerful lines, "I will not forget that I am a non-commissioned officer, a leader of soldiers," a figure at the back of the room, previously unnoticed, began to move. It was Lieutenant General Wallace, a man whose reputation was the stuff of modern military legend. He had slipped in quietly, intending only to observe, but what he had just witnessed demanded a response. He had removed his 3-star service cap, holding it respectfully against his chest. His aide-de-camp tried to whisper something to him, but the general waved him off, his eyes locked on the woman at the podium. He began to walk forward, his polished shoes making no sound on the tiled floor. The crowd, sensing the shift in gravity, parted for him as if by instinct. He did not stop to greet the stunned base commander or the flustered captain. His path was a straight, unwavering line to the woman who now stood in silence, her recitation complete. He came to a halt 3 feet in front of her. For a long moment, the two of them simply looked at each other, a silent, weighted exchange that transcended rank and time. Then, with a precision that was breathtaking to behold, Lieutenant General Wallace snapped to attention and executed the sharpest, most deeply reverent salute of his entire 40-year career. It was a gesture of such profound respect that it sent a shockwave through the room. The woman, in turn, did not salute back. That would have been improper protocol, but gave a slow, formal nod of acknowledgement, an acceptance from one professional to another. The general held his salute, a silent, public correction of the ignorance that had filled the room moments before. General Wallace finally lowered his hand, but his gaze remained fixed on the woman. He then turned, slowly, to face the assembly, his eyes sweeping over the stunned faces until they landed, like twin lasers, on Staff Sergeant Miller. Miller seemed to shrink in his chair, the blood draining from his face. The general's voice, when it came, was a low rumble, the sound of distant thunder that promised a storm. For the benefit of those in this room who are too young, too ignorant, or too arrogant to know their own history, he began, each word carefully chosen, each syllable a hammer blow of condemnation. "You are in the presence of a giant," he paused, letting the weight of his statement settle. "This is Command Sergeant Major Evelyn Reed, retired." She was one of the first women ever to graduate the Q course and be officially attached to a Special Forces Operational Detachment Alpha. She was our comms sergeant. She was our medic. On more than one occasion, she was our salvation. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Her fake medals, Staff Sergeant," he said, his voice dropping to an icy whisper, "include the Distinguished Service Cross, awarded for her actions in a valley whose name you will never know, in a country we were never in. It includes 3 Bronze Stars, all with V devices for valor. It includes a Purple Heart from the same ambush that put me in a field hospital for 6 months and put 3 of our teammates in the ground." The general's words hung in the dead silent air. The narrative had been shattered and rewritten in a single, devastating monologue. The quiet old woman was a ghost, a legend from the classified pages of history, made flesh. The general's aide stepped forward, holding a thin, black-bordered file. He handed it to the base commander, whose hands trembled slightly as he took it. "Her official file is 90% redacted," General Wallace continued, his voice regaining its command authority. "Most of her service record is sealed under classifications that even I can no longer access. But I don't need a file to remember. I remember her pulling me out of a burning vehicle. I remember her calling in an air strike with one hand while holding a dying man's artery closed with the other. I remember her voice on the radio, calm and steady, the only thing that kept an entire team from breaking when we were surrounded and outnumbered 50 to 1 inch." He took a step closer to the podium, turning his body to address Evelyn directly, his voice softening with a respect that bordered on reverence. "She taught a generation of Green Berets what toughness really was. She taught us that competence knows no gender. She taught us that the deadliest weapon on any battlefield is a quiet professional who does their job, no matter the cost." He turned back to the room, his eyes once again finding Miller. "She never spoke of her accomplishments. She never had to. Her actions spoke for her. Her legacy is written not in ink on a page, but in the lives of the men who came home because of her. Men like me." He let that final statement hang in the air, a definitive, unassailable truth. The case was closed. The verdict was in. The quiet professional had been vindicated not by her own words, but by the unimpeachable testimony of a living legend she herself had saved. The story of what happened at the Warriors' breakfast spread through the base like a flash fire. It traveled through text messages, through hushed conversations in motor pools, through awestruck retellings in the barracks. It wasn't just gossip, it was a parable, a lesson delivered with the force of a thunderclap. A cell phone video of General Wallace's salute, grainy and shaky, became a viral artifact within the closed networks of the military community, viewed by thousands as a sacred text on the nature of respect. Staff Sergeant Miller became an instant cautionary tale, a meme for institutional arrogance. He was formally counseled by his chain of command, but the true punishment was the weight of his own shame. A few days later, he was seen waiting outside the base library, where Command Sergeant Major Reed volunteered. He didn't approach her with a quick, mumbled apology. He stood for nearly an hour, waiting for her to finish, his posture no longer arrogant, but deferential. When she finally emerged, he stood before her, his head bowed. He didn't just apologize for his ignorance. He asked her if she would consider speaking to his squad, to teach his young NCOs what she knew. He asked not as a superior, but as a supplicant seeking wisdom. Evelyn Reed looked at the humbled man before her, and after a long, appraising silence, she gave the same, single nod she had given at the breakfast. "Understood," was all she said. There was no recrimination, no, "I told you so." The incident was never mentioned again. Her focus was not on the past insult, but on the future opportunity to build better soldiers. From that day forward, a quiet transformation began. Evelyn Reed started holding weekly leadership sessions for Miller's NCOs, and soon, soldiers from other units began to attend. She never spoke of her own war stories. Instead, she taught land navigation with an old compass and a worn map. She taught tactical communication by making them master the art of the concise, clear report. She taught them that leadership wasn't about the volume of your voice, but the quality of your example. She broke down the NCO creed, not as a text to be memorized, but as a series of promises to be lived. Staff Sergeant Miller was at every single session, standing at the back of the room, taking notes like the greenest private. His entire demeanor had changed. The brittle shell of his arrogance had been shattered, replaced by a quiet, intense desire to learn. He had been humbled by competence, and in that humbling, he found a new path to strength. The dining hall where the incident occurred was never officially renamed, but among the enlisted ranks, it became known as Reed Hall. The soldiers themselves, the ones who had witnessed the event, pooled their money and had a small brass plaque made. They affixed it to the podium where she had stood, engraving on it the first line of the creed she had so powerfully reclaimed. "No one is more professional than I." It was a permanent reminder that true authority comes not from a rank on a collar, but from a standard held within the soul. A year later, at the next annual Warriors' breakfast, the master of ceremonies was the newly promoted Sergeant, First Class Miller. He stepped to the podium, the same one now bearing the small brass plaque, and the room fell silent. He did not open with a joke. He opened by telling the story of Command Sergeant Major Evelyn Reed. He told it with humility, with reverence, and with the hard-won wisdom of a man who had been forced to confront his own profound ignorance. The story had become institutional folklore, a foundational myth for the entire installation, passed down to new arrivals as a mandatory lesson. It was a lesson about the poison of assumptions, a lesson about the difference between volume and value, a lesson that the most decorated heroes are often the ones who have no need to broadcast their own greatness. Evelyn Reed was in attendance, sitting at the same small table, a quiet figure in a sea of uniforms. She watched, her expression unreadable, as the man who had once mocked her now canonized her. Her legacy was not in the shadow box of medals, which she no longer brought with her. Her true legacy was standing at the podium, a changed man. It was in the rapt faces of the young soldiers listening, learning to see past the surface. It was the quiet, powerful ripple of competence and respect that would continue long after she was gone, a silent wave correcting the course of an entire generation. The narrative of our lives is not written by the loud voices of skeptics, but by the quiet consistency of our actions. True strength does not need to announce its presence. It is felt in the calm at the center of the storm. Evelyn Reed's story is a testament to the enduring power of silent professionalism. She sought no validation, for her worth was forged in crucibles the ignorant could never imagine. Her medals were not trophies to be displayed, but scars to be honored, reminders of a price paid in silence and service. The respect she commanded was not given freely. It was earned through decades of unwavering discipline and selfless courage. Her legacy is a powerful reminder that character is not what you say, but what you do when no one is watching. It is the quiet resolve to uphold a standard, to embody a creed, to be the person that others can depend on when all else fails. Her silence was her shield, and her competence was her sword, and with them, she corrected the world around her, not with anger, but with the undeniable, irrefutable proof of her own quiet greatness. Her story teaches us to look deeper, to listen to the silence, and to honor the quiet professionals who walk among us, their greatness hidden in plain sight, waiting only for the wise to see. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud ignorance, and where true character defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.